So first I want to start by saying thank you all for coming today. I know it's 5 o'clock on a Thursday. You probably have a million other places you could be, but you chose to be here, so I thank you for that. So basically my project, as you've seen around the building, is about code switching in social media. And basically what I did is I analyzed code switching with this particular character that is famous on YouTube, known as Abuela. We'll go ahead and get started. So, I guess the first thing we need to do is define what code switching is. Some of you may not know what that is exactly, but there are many definitions that have been provided by various linguists, and this particular definition states that the systemic use of two or more languages or varieties of the same language during oral or written discourse, right? Some people have defined code switching as either using the same, or switching between two languages if within one turn, or within, like, if, say for example, I'm saying something and I stop and then somebody else says something. That's one turn, and then the other speaker has their one turn, right? So some people say that code switching is if you switch languages within your one turn, or if you're just switching languages altogether within the entire discourse. But I'm going with this definition for this project. Let's see. Oh, before it was known, code switching was thought of as people filling in their gaps of knowledge of one language with words from another because they didn't want to seem incompetent in a certain language. So now that they're seeing that it's not solely just that, there's more to it than just that, they're starting to do more research into it. So yeah. Okay, so the majority of studies that I found have a qualitative approach, meaning that mostly what they do is just analyze the different types of code switching that occur. And then quantitative approaches typically just more or less do the same thing, but they tally how much each type is occurring, right? So basically what I'm doing in my study is kind of a hybrid approach, which is also the approach that Dozier took, which is the previous study that I'm referencing later on in the PowerPoint. But yeah, I'm taking a hybrid approach where I basically classify the different types of code switching, and then I calculate how many times each one happens in the number of videos that I watched. So basically my research questions are: what are the most frequent types of code switching? How do we classify the different types of code switching? And then do the results of my project align with the results of previous studies? Okay, so basically in the Dozier study, she analyzed this sitcom called ¿Qué pasa USA? What's happening, or What's up USA? And it's the first bilingual sitcom to air in the United States. I think it was back in the 1970s. And it's basically about a Cuban-American family that immigrated from Cuba. And they live in Miami, Florida, in the Little Havana neighborhood. And basically, what they're doing is, in the show, it's about the family's struggle when they come to the United States and they're having to learn English and learn this new culture and the new language, obviously English, and just the struggles that each generation has, the struggles that come with moving to the United States. So what she saw was the older generation obviously was more like resistant to learning English, and they wanted to maintain the Spanish culture and the Spanish language. The middle generation, the parents that you see there in the middle, they typically have a mastery of both languages because they go out and work. They speak Spanish at home with their parents. The younger generation, however, they mostly speak English because most of their time is spent outside the house in school or that kind of thing. So basically, so there's this kind of like identity crisis, I guess you could call it, where they're confused and they're trying to, the younger generation at least, is trying to maintain their Cubanness while at the same time attain their Americanness. So they have this like struggle between each generation, like, okay, are you doing what you need to be doing? You're not speaking enough Spanish, or you're not speaking enough English, right? So that's kind of the idea behind that. So what she did was she looked at 14 different characters in the series and watched 3 different episodes and transcribed each episode and looked at the different types of code switching that were occurring there. And she classified each character by their sex, male or female, and then by the generation, first, second, or third. A clarification about the generations. Typically we think of first generation as you're the first generation in the United States and your parents were born somewhere else, right? It's not quite that same definition in this study, so I'll explain it later, but just get that out of your head. So basically, what she finds is that there's a higher use of code switching among men than women, and then there's a higher use of code switching within the second generation individuals rather than first or third generation. Okay. All right, so this is how she classifies the different types of code switching. So she's got intersentential as the first one, which is defined as the code switch happening between the end of one sentence and the beginning of the next. So there's an example here. No es este país, es los tiempos. It's, okay, so that's the English translation in brackets. Times change, young people change, right? So you see the code switching happening after es los tiempos and starting again at times change, right? So the switch is happening between the two sentences. Then next she's got verb phrase, which this I actually changed in my study because this definition says that the code switching is happening at the boundary of a verb phrase. But I wanted it to be a little more inclusive and include where the change could be happening at a prepositional phrase or an adverbial phrase or an adjective phrase, that kind of thing. So here she's got an example there. You better get used to living in this house porque aquí es donde tú vives, right? And then she's got vocative code switching, which vocative is just a fancy way of saying the name that you use to refer to someone, right? So they switch the language only to refer to that person, which is typically just used to maintain that solidarity and that connection that you have with that other person. So even though she's speaking in English, she calls the child niña, right? So that's a vocative because she's calling her niña even though she's speaking English. And then we've got interjection, where, once again, it's relatively simple. The speaker switches the languages only for an introduction. So, Dios mío, this is a welcome home party, Joe. Or Joe. Joe. Yes, excellent. So yeah, so she's just switching, she's saying that interjection in Spanish and then the rest of it is in English. And then lastly, she has lexical item, where the speaker borrows just a word from one language and inserts it into the dialogue of another. So in this example, as you can see, estoy super excited con tu date, right? So in this instance, I'm assuming excited and date have to do with the fact that they're in America and she's going on this date in America with some American boy. And so that's why the words are in English in that case. Yes, and remember I changed verb phrase. I changed that actually to intrasentential, so it just covers any kind of change that occurs within the sentence that's not one of these below, right? All right, so what she found was intersentential, again, being between the end of one sentence and the beginning of the next. 70% of the code switching that occurred were intersentential code switches, right? Verb phrase, she found 13% of them occurred at the boundary of a verb phrase. Vocatives, 8% were, 8% of the code switching was, the niña or abuela, just referring to the person that you're talking to. 5% of them were lexical items where she inserted some word in place of the word in the original language that they're speaking in. And the interjection is the same, like the Dios mío, this is a party, right? So 4% were observed there. Now when it comes to these statistics over here on the right side, you're probably wondering why they don't add up to 100%. And she doesn't very clearly say why they don't, but I think I figured it out. Basically, I think what she's saying is, out of all the turns that were taken in the series, or in the 3 episodes that she transcribed, 32% of them that involved code switching were done by men, if that makes sense. So of all the turns that were made, 32% of those involved code switching by men, right? Of all the turns that were made in all 3 episodes, 25% of them involved code switching by women, right? So that's why it doesn't add up to 100%, because not 100% of the terms involve code switching, right? So when it gets down to the generation classification, we've got first, second, and third. So this is where I was saying that it's slightly different than what we normally think of as first generation, because as you get down generation, you typically are thinking younger, because it's second generation is the offspring of the first people that first came to the U.S. or whatever country you moved to. So in her study, first generation is anyone under the age of 31. Second generation is anyone between the ages of 31 and 50. Third generation is anyone above 51 years old. So what she found was clearly a huge difference here between first and second and in the third generation, where the younger individuals did more code switching, and the older ones stick with their main language, their heritage language is Spanish in this case. and only 3% of them involve code switching, right? And then she broke it down by language as well, where basically she's saying, out of all the terms that were made, 31% of them that involved code switching started in Spanish and then switched to English. So Spanish was the first language that they spoke, and then they switched to English. And then 27% started in English and then switched to Spanish. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, so just keep in mind, the second generation did most of the code switching, and men did most of the code switching as well. Okay? So, basically, I selected this subject. Her name is Jenny Lorenzo. She's a 31-year-old Cuban-American woman. So, I mean, it pretty much aligns with the same kind of people that you saw in K-Pasta USA because they were Cuban-Americans. And then I have her little bio here. She's an actress, a writer, and video producer born and raised in Miami. She's mainly famous for her work in aggressive comics and We Are Me Too, if you've ever seen videos by them. She's been recognized by NBC News, the Huffington Post, the Louisville Herald, BuzzFeed, and We Are Me Too. And then she's also one of the original creators of BuzzFeed's first sister companies, Pero Like. So you may have heard about her Pero Like coming in as well. So I figured she was kind of the ideal candidate because, again here, according to this study, it says females have been found to adhere more frequently to standard established linguistic forms, implying that they engage in code switching less often, right? So that aligns with what she found, what Dozier found in her study, saying that women code switch less. And the interesting thing about that is 60% of the turns that were taken in K-Pasta USA, in those 3 episodes at least, were taken by women. So women spoke more, but they code switched less. So that was something that I found to be interesting. So yeah, that's why I guess I picked her, because since women code switch less, it'd be interesting to see how they code switch. And then also, she's on the cusp of the first and second generation. If you remember back here, second generation starts at the age of 31. And she, I think, is still currently 31. I did this project a few months ago. She was 31. So yeah, she's right there on the cusp, right in between both generations. Yeah, and then second generation immigrants, those between 31 and 50, code switch the most at 34%. But first generation uses have been significant as well at 28%, as we saw on the previous slide. All right, so basically, I pretty much did the same thing, except the YouTube videos are obviously a lot shorter than the episodes of the sitcom. I think the videos on average are between 1 and 2 minutes each. And I watched 15 YouTube videos of hers, and yeah, so I categorized the different types of code switching, and you see them here. The only thing that's different from the previous study is the interest-intentional category, where she used verb phrase. And I took the frequency of each of these code switches and represented it as a percentage, right? So for example, if there were 100 total cases of code switching and 20 of them were interest-intentional, then 20% of them would have been interest-intentional, right? So yeah, you've got some examples here of interest-intentional code switching, where she says, "Hola mis vidas, mis cielos, mis melocotones bombones. Today I will show you how to blah, blah, blah," right? Code switching happening at the end of one sentence, beginning of the next. Interest-intentional, in this video, she's running for president. She says, "Under my presidency," we'll see this video later. She says, "Nadie va a pasar hambre porque I will personally make sure blah, 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 blah." Vocatives, again, that's what you refer to the person as. She says, "On the 12th day of Christmas, my abuela sent to me," right? So she's still referring to her grandmother as abuela and not grandmother, since she's speaking in English. And then interjection, she says, "Oye, no cursing in front of Jesus," right? And then lexical items. Yeah, so you have the 2 lexical items in English, where she says, "Lo que me encanta de estos pancakes es que vienen con Crystal Crunch Rocks," right? So that means what I love about these pancakes is that they come with Crystal Crunch Rocks, right? That was, I think she was at some Denny, there was like a Star Wars themed Denny menu or some Denny's menu. So that's, yeah, she was trying different foods there. Okay. All right, so I've got 3 videos to show you guys. This first one is about, I forget this girl's name, but she does similar skits as Abuela. Jessica, okay. Yeah. They're basically at a quinceañera, and they're kind of like trying to one-up each other. The second video is of her running for president. And then the third video is a little scandalous, but we're all grown, so it'll be fine. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. And there are subtitles if you do not understand Spanish.
No puedo creer lo grande que está tu nieta, 15 años. Wow.
Como pasan los años.
Aunque I don't really like this purple. It's a little tacky.
Bueno, speaking of tacky, me encanta tu vestidito.
Gracias, sí. Esto un dineral. Este vestido para que lo sepas.
Qué raro, porque yo vi ese mismo vestidito en el sale rack en JCPenney. Sí, la semana pasada.
¿Cómo conseguiste el tuyo? ¿Lo pusiste tú misma?
Lo compré en un auction que se lo puso Princess Diana.
Ah, sí.
Sí.
Sabes que cuando mi nieta tuvo sus 15, lo tuvimos en un salón grandísimo en el Palacio de Buckingham.
Sí, el Buckingham Palace.
Sí.
El salón ahí en Hialeah.
Y tuvo su entrada con el mismo carrusel de Cinderella.
Sí, en Calabaza. Tú sabes que contratamos el chef más famoso del mundo.
¿Así? ¿Cuál? ¿El Boyardee?
No, la Julia Child.
Ya no se murió hace mucho tiempo. En la quinceañera de mi nieta tuvimos a Wolfgang Mozart como el chef.
No quiere decir Wolfgang Pop.
No. Mozart como chef.
Mozart cocinó.
Sí.
Sabes que las flores that we picked out came from el garden de Martha Stewart.
Esto. Y adivina quién cantó en el 15 de mi nieta.
¿Quién?
Luis Miguel.
Desde la cárcel. En el FaceTime. Bueno, menos mal que nosotros conseguimos a Elvis Crespo a cantar hoy.
Eso yo no te lo creo. Eso ya son mentiras.
Who are you? Who are you?
I'm Mirta.
Mirta, okay, where are you from? From here?
I'm from Venezuela.
Ah, okay. Que yo quiero sentir tu labio besándome otra vez. Desde el GPS te estire a la rumba. Si no vienes, mami que lo quiero. Si no vienes, mami que lo quiero. Después soy feliz con el bonita. Desde el GPS te estire a la rumba.
The next video is her running for president of the United States.
Hello, my fellow Americans. Under my presidency, nadie va a pasar hambre porque I will personally make sure that you get your alimento. The Tienes que Comer Reform Act of 2017 will enforce strict guidelines on las dietas. For instance, la pizza no es comida. Artículo 4 de la Constitución Americana explica la prohibición de alimentos tóxicos. I have implemented mandatory cafecito breaks between the hours of 2 and 3 p.m. Pero voy a acabar con el Starbucks porque eso no es café. Yo sé que when it comes to our healthcare, la cosa no es fácil. Insurance packages include sopa de pollo, sana colita de rana y el azabache por el mal de ojo. Ya tú sabes. With only an oración as copay. If a citizen under the age of 35 is caught outside sin un suéter with temperatures below 75 degrees, they will be fined. Other offenses include walking around sin zapatos con el pelo mojado, taking a bath después de comer, or being a dormilón. In order to decrease the nation's crime rate, police will now be equipped with non-lethal chancletas y el cinturón. A new neighborhood watch system called Ten Cuidado will be issued in neighborhoods across America. And vecinos will take turns rotating en la ventana to keep an eye out for malcriados. Thank you for listening, my fellow brothers and sisters of America. God bless. Y en el nombre del Padre, el Hijo y el Espíritu Santo. Amén. Ponte un suéter, carajo.
Alright, and then, like I said, this one's a little scandalous. It's just emojis, and it's her daughter talking to her grandmother and explaining what the emojis mean. So, just don't say I didn't warn you.
Oh.
Hola, what are you doing? Bueno, quería saber what this tiki was about. ¿Y qué significa esto?
Eso es un eggplant.
¿Cómo se dice? Eggplant.
Ajá, sí.
Ah, una berenjena. Ya veo, qué lindo. Y estos son como gotitas de agua.
Ajá.
Like to wash an eggplant. Sí.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
You must always wash your berenjena porque si está sucio no sirve.
Esto significa L y O.
Lo,
Yeah, it's short for long gas.
Karen, ya que te dije yo, do not wait for your tank to be empty porque si no te quedas por la calle botada y yo no sé qué me voy a hacer si... ¿Y esto?
Una explosión of fruits para hacer un smoothie.
¡Ay, qué rico! A mí me encanta el melocotón.
Un fruit smoothie con salad de peaches y eggplant.
¿Tú comes eso? Juntos. Qué asco.
I'm so thirsty. Do you think you could bring me some agua? please?
No, pero espérate, niña, ya tú eres mujerona. Cógelo tú misma, ahí está la cocina.
Ay, mira, ese es un niño con pelo crespo, abuela. He's really happy because he's gonna have a soda with his friends.
Soda. Eso parece a cerveza.
Well,
Y tiene cara de mojón el tipo.
ese es un gallo, abuela.
Ah, sí, un gallo. I used to raise them in Cuba.
Cool.
Sí. ¿Por qué tiene el no al lado?
It means don't feed the gallos.
¿Por qué? ¿El qué?
Pizza. Don't feed the gallos pizza.
Porque la pizza no es comida. Claro que sí, mi niña. ¿Qué te estuve? Mira qué cool. Es como soy un teenager. I learned a new language.
Ajá.
Sí.
Bueno, I gotta go.
Ok, mi niña.
Bye.
Te quiero.
This is, do you want to go to the market today? Of course.
Julie left your laptop open.
I think that's some movie she was advertising to get money for her videos. But yeah, so that's irrelevant. Okay, so basically, what I found from these 15 videos that I watched, and you saw 3 of the 15, so you saw a good portion of it. Okay, so here we go. So what I found, where is it? There are 599 cases total of code switching that I observed in all 15 of these videos. And the one that stuck out the most was this one here, video 7, which this one, you see here, there's a total of 218 out of the 599. So that's a good 36%. So I mean, a huge chunk of it came from that one video alone. And I figured that that was because that song was about the 12 days of Christmas. So a lot of the things are being repeated and over and over and over again, right? So, and I did count every single one. So maybe if I had not done that, it would have been a lot lower, but that's neither here nor there. And then I also found that 62% of them, or the 136 that I found here, were in trust intention, right? So 62% of these things, they were all happening within the sentence, right, in that video. Oh, and then I have these highlighted because these are the videos that we just watched. So this one is the emoji video, the one we just saw. The 4th one is about the presidency, when she was running for president. And then this 13th one here is the quinceañera, the one that we watched the first one we watched. Yeah, so of the 3 videos, 4, 7, and 14, they had the highest totals, and that was itself 60% of all the code switching. So 3/5 of all the code switching happened in those 3 videos alone. And then what else? Okay, so that's it for this. So this looks a little complicated, but it's just the raw data, right? And it gets condensed down to a bar graph here, where the totals that you saw at the bottom, the totals you saw to the far right are the totals of each type of code switching, right? So there were 335 cases of intra-sentential code switching, 154 of lexical item code switching, 81 of intersentential, 21 of vocative, 8 of interjection. And then the next graph I have, or chart I guess I should say, is a pie chart, where it gives the percentages. So this is pretty much the exact same thing you saw in the raw data table, but in a pie chart to make it look a little neater. This intersentential was 56% of the cases, so just over half. About a quarter of the code switching cases were lexical item switches. 13.5% were intersentential, 3.5 were vocatives, and 1.34 were interjections. All right, so to conclude, there was a strong preference for intersentential uses. As you saw, it was 330 something odd cases. Lexical item borrowing from both languages, I observed that as well. So there were a lot of, like if they were speaking in Spanish, there were a lot of English words that were thrown into the Spanish sentences. And if they were speaking English, a lot of Spanish words were thrown into the sentences. And it's somewhat consistent with previous studies because the main difference I noticed was when I changed the category from verb phrase to intrasentential jumped up a lot. Intersentential dropped down, and so much in fact that it was 70% intersentential in Dozier's study, and 13% intrasentential, like I guess the verb phrase, in her study. And then I had 13% intersentential, where she had 70, and then I had 56% intrasentential, where she had 13. So they just kind of flipped. Yeah, but other than that, everything was pretty much consistent. There weren't many vocatives, there weren't many interjections. But lexical items also jumped up as well. Okay, I don't think so. So obviously, for future research, you can always collect more data, which I've never done. So what I would like to do, if I were to continue a project similar to this, is have more speakers that are men and women, have different people from different generations, first, second, and third, all 3 generations. And then I'd also like to have an intersentential breakdown, where intersentential just kind of covered all the different types of code switching that happened within the sentence outside of those other 3 categories. But I like to break it down, like I was saying earlier, into the prepositional changes, the adverbial changes, the adjective changes. And then I didn't, if you remember I mentioned before, she looked at how many were starting in Spanish and then switched to English, and how many started in English and then switched to Spanish. I did not do that in my study. It would be nice to do that just to see, because it looks like she was speaking a lot of English in here, more English so than they did in KPAS USA. And then another thing that's also in common with the previous study is these YouTube videos and like the sitcoms and videos like that, they're all scripted. So, you know, it doesn't really represent natural speech. So it'd be nice to see like if these results align with a study where I was observing people just spontaneously speaking, because you know that's how we talk. It's not scripted, right? The scripted is only on in media. And then also the setting of the conversation, because for example, the quinceañera, most of the things that they were doing, if they switched, most of the things that they said were in Spanish because it's related to Spanish culture. That's something that we don't have here in the United States. Whereas when she was running for president of the United States, most of the things she was saying were in English. So that's another thing to look at as well, just to see the different types of context that they're in when they do this code switching. And I believe that is it. It is.